recognize that technology is inherently human. It's who is using the technology at the end of the day. And so when I look at certain technologies that are extremely inspiring right now, digital twins is one that really jumps to that, because what you're doing is you're taking a physical object or a physical process and you're turning it into this digitized version where you can experiment over and over again. What you're really doing is you're unlocking human imagination and unlimited research and development at a fraction of the cost.
Hi, everyone. I'm Barbara Humpton, and this is The Optimistic Outlook. We're recording this episode in June, but I want to go to the start of the year, when the tech world convened in Las Vegas for CES. Many of our listeners are probably familiar with CES. It's this massive, futuristic event. And for a long time, people wondered why Siemens was there. We're a company focused on industrial tech, not the consumer tech that CES is known for. But CES now showcases a lot of industry and enterprise innovation. This evolution of CES as a space for both consumer and industrial technologies reflects something we explore a lot on this podcast. The breakthroughs in the consumer world are now coming to the world of industry and infrastructure. And it's changing everything. For example, one of the technologies that Siemens showcased this year at CES was industrial AI. We highlighted one of our partners, the aviation startup JetZero. JetZero is developing a groundbreaking blended wing aircraft, and they're optimizing the design and production of it using our AI-enabled software. With industrial AI, JetZero can problem solve in the virtual world, and it can test its design, and it can do it all before anything actually gets built. This isn't just the future of air travel, but the future of industry. And I think we've only scratched the surface. So what is next? Is industrial tech catching up or now leading the way? I'm excited to peer into the crystal ball a bit more with my guest today, Brian Comiskey. Brian is the Senior Director of Innovation and Trends for the Consumer Technology Association, which hosts CES. He's also CTA's Futurist, so he's constantly looking at the megatrends that are shaping our world and our future. I met Brian at CES and was fascinated by his perspective on the digital revolution, especially his take on the progress we've made and where we can go from here. I'm thrilled he's now here to share his outlook with you. Take a listen. Brian Comiskey, thank you for joining the Optimistic Outlook podcast.
Of course, Barbara, thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, listen, I want to start with explaining to our audience, what is a futurist? And I want to have them enjoy hearing, what was your path to this role?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, Futurist it sounds like it's a fancy word. It's also the name of a Robert Downey album. But it really speaks to this idea of asking two big questions at the end of the day. What if and why not? So you could do that from a political perspective. You can do it from an economic perspective. I tend to come into the technology perspective, and there's also a sociological element to it. But really, it's coming down to what is happening in technology? How is that going to change, not just in the year to come, but the decades to come? And how does that influence humanity? And how did I get into that? Well, I'm just a curious person. My entire career has always been really about asking those questions, whether it's in the technology space, the banking space, the energy space, or even consulting with the U.S. Coast Guard. I was always just curious to learn more about any industry I can. And so I think that's the natural sort of flow of, well, how does one get into being a futurist? You got to be probably one of the more intellectually curious people out there.
You got to be intellectually curious, but there's also something about then being able to synthesize that into positions, statements that other people can understand.
There's so much technical jargon out there that's great, it's exciting, but I don't want to sound like a textbook, and I don't think we should talk like we're in textbooks. Instead, it's really important to recognize that technology is inherently human. It's who is using the technology at the end of the day. And so I think that's one of the most important things about how do you package that information? Well, it's who's digesting the information, who's going to use it at the end of the day. You could say generative AI all you want, but it's more, well, here's a chatbot that you can work with that can help answer questions, or maybe you don't have a coding background and you have a chat assistant that can help you code if you want without that classical background, because maybe you couldn't afford that education. Maybe you don't have the technical capability, but at least evens the playing field. That's much nicer and correct to say in my mind than saying this is the exact type of model that creates it. I think that's fascinating in an intellectual academic discussion, but I think it's important that we should really make sure that we're speaking in a way that everyone understands what technology can do for them.
I actually think this is something that CTA has pioneered for us. I think back over the history of CTA, and by the way, the establishment of what was then called the Consumer Electronics Show.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that there was a place once a year where people could gather and just see what are innovators doing. And we saw a lot from that consumer world, now rebranded as CES because CTA has gone way beyond the pure consumer products that maybe were the first focus. What you all are doing for us once a year is bringing together the biggest tech show in the world and showing people the art of the possible.
What drew me to CES in the first place is there's this rich history in the US as well as abroad of showcases and forums that showcase technology. I think of like as a kid, I'd see photos of the World's Fair or I went to Epcot. That's what CES in my way in my view has always felt like. It's this window, this platform to tomorrow. And part of what has shifted over time, as you mentioned, it's gone from Consumer Electronics Show to CES because, well, 40% of our exhibitors are showcasing some form of enterprise or industrial technology because that line between the consumer and enterprise is blurring. So my role at the show is really to start to map out, well, how are those technologies diffusing across different segments? Are they just consumer technologies? Or maybe they're starting in the enterprise or the industrial sector, and the trickle down will come to the consumer eventually. One that I think of a lot of times is we've seen so much in the mobility sector, the automotive sector, self-driving or autonomous vehicle capability. You've seen so much on the consumer side, but where is the lot of the innovation happening? Autonomous trucking. It's happening in the robo-taxi space where it's really about the enterprise solutions, really forging ahead and making this technology safer, more efficient, more optimal for moving traffic flows. That's going to come to the consumer eventually, but sometimes it has to start in that enterprise and industrial side.
It's interesting to hear you talk about this because you actually describe it almost in the reverse way I do. I've been viewing this as a migration from the consumer world into the enterprise, right? Taking the technologies that brought the Internet of People and now inserting those technologies into these large enterprises, whether it's John Deere and the way agriculture gets done today, or whether, as you say, the way healthcare is getting done. Now we at Siemens are working on this when it comes to industry and infrastructure and transportation. But what's clear is it is symbiotic, right? It's the in in the world of digitalization, we had Moore's law.
Yep.
In the worlds that we've been working on, the real world, we have the laws of physics.
Hmm.
And so that's led to different kind of speeds. We operate at different speeds. And now all of a sudden, we're recognizing that you can bring that digitalization to the real world. That enables a brand new cycle to kick into high gear for the real world.
Well, when I think about that sort of technology, you're talking about what the process of what we would call digital transformation, right?
Yeah,
This idea of how are we transferring to get more digitized across the board in terms of how we are more dataified, if you want to create
sure.
another
Anything that can produce
ver-
data now
anything.
can use this technology. Right.
Exactly. I would say we've actually kind of pivoted into a new era, which is digital coexistence. Our physical lives are almost equally digital. We're online all the time, whether that is for e-commerce, social connection, or even working or learning where you have hybrid work. So in that case, you're coexisting with two personas almost, an online and a physical self. And so when I look at certain technologies that are extremely inspiring right now, digital twins is one that really jumps to that because what you're doing is you're taking a physical object or a physical process or a physical just really space if you will, and you're turning it into this digitized version where you can experiment over and over again with how am I going to set up maybe a textile factory or how am I going to build a race car. But what you're really doing is you're unlocking human imagination and unlimited research and development at a fraction of the cost, because if you think about the physical cap expense, if you're doing that in a physical environment but you're now digitizing it, what you're really showcasing is this idea of unlocking really the true human potential. And that sounds very almost contradictory when you say a digital world and unlocking human potential, but that's really what we're projecting onto these spaces is this recognition of just the unlimited potential of the human mind.
I'll never forget the first time I had a conversation with you, and you immediately brought up digital twins. I was thrilled to see that, first of all, that
Mhm.
you knew. And Siemens went about the whole project of pulling together the software that would empower the world's most comprehensive digital twin, now in use in so many of those things you've talked about. And by the way, many others have joined the party since then.
Mm.
And so we recognize now this new discipline, the digital transformation happening in a lot of places is precisely this. So they can get to the point where they're actually now experimenting using technology before they ever move into the physical world for a product.
That technology also saves lives, and we've seen even at CES replications of the human heart or the human brain to study new surgical techniques. And so what you're talking about is leveling the playing field of learning too in a lot of ways, and smoothing out where maybe you didn't have the resources to pioneer a new surgery because you don't have the right tools, or you only have a certain amount of doctors in a certain area. Well, now with this technology you can practice over and over. You're in a way, as someone who comes from the gaming background, you're gamifying in a new way to really unlock new learning capability. So I think that's what impresses me, is that there's just so much human element to it.
Brian, I know at CES this year, you came to our booth. Thank you so much for doing an episode of your daily report from Siemens booth. And you featured Jet Zero as one of the partners in our booth. They're building a new blended wing aircraft. They've used our design software. They're going to be building a manufacturing plant. In fact, it's just been announced they're going to be putting that in Greensboro Airport in North Carolina. North Carolina is becoming such an aviation hub. And here, Jet Zero is establishing what will be some of the most advanced manufacturing in the US, right there in North Carolina.
And it's incredible too, because you think about it, actually, in a lot of ways, North Carolina has always been an aviation hub, considering I think about the Wright brothers flying there.
Amen.
So it actually passes maybe prologue in that regard. But I think what fascinated me about and why I visited the booth is the blended jet wing design, just knowing about its aerodynamic efficiency as well as the environmental capabilities on it. I think that's what impressed me so much. And then you layer in the idea of, oh, we can do industrial AI to help make the manufacturing process more smooth, efficient, cost effective. And so, really seeing this announcement and hearing about this announcement brings me excitement, because this is an area of it showcases something that at CES you hear so much about the future, but seeing it in practice in the present, it just makes it all the more real and really showcases the power of that platform and the power of our exhibitors that come and showcase their innovation there.
There is this space where we know we've seen this in Moore's Law, we've seen this rapid transformation, we've seen the Mag 7, the Mag 5.
Yep.
We've seen, this growth and explosion of tech investing. And I think there's this exciting new moment
Mm.
in the world of investment where investing in the technologies that transform the real world is a huge opportunity. So we're seeing the transformation of manufacturing
Yep.
today. We're seeing the transformation of transportation. So, this idea of investing in the technology that combines the real and the digital, anything that can produce data now can integrate with technologies that have matured over the last 20 years. This is an exciting new field of investment, and I'm encouraging people to take a closer look, get more involved in transforming the real world segments. What are you seeing as the trends? And not the next 18 months, 2 years. Wait, I'm sure you're thinking much further out.
So the first one is, I think we're on the cusp for robotics of taking a massive leap. And that starts with some of the advances we've seen with generative AI, where you've seen much more intuitive learning models going on board robots. The first step of that we actually saw at CES this year, which is you starting to see robotic vacuums with arms attached to them that can move and pick up objects in the way of the vacuum. Because if you think about where maybe a robotic vacuum started, you had it move, and then sometimes a sock would be in the way and it would really have a hard time with that. Eventually it learned to move around it, but now that it's starting to learn how to move it out of the way and start to more intuitively get it to accomplish its task, you're starting to see that leap take shape, and that's really starting in humanoids. And I really think in the next decade to come, we're going to start to see humanoid robotics really showcase their capability of, again, being these collaborative cobots in a way. How do they maybe move a heavy object in a warehouse that helps save the backs of workers literally, so that they can work alongside and do things that are more human in their work on a day-to-day basis. That's one of the big ones I'm looking forward to.
Can I pause on that
Please
for
do.
just a minute? Why is humanoid important?
Well, I think the idea of humanoid is we already have workforce gaps in a lot of ways, especially in some of our more industrial sectors, as well as kind of the warehouse sector. So having robotics that can move with more human-like precision and with maybe some human-like evaluation of their surroundings can really help fill some of those gaps and free us up to do more of that sort of knowledge work, or some of the more complex tasks that happen in the day-to-day basis. So I think the humanoid element to it is really important because it gets into this coexistence idea, which is our technology should feel more intuitive. It should be more of a reflection of us than really something that is just, maybe cold and disconnected. It will have a little bit more of that connection to the humanity itself.
Okay, yeah. Well, this is going to be interesting. I mean, frankly, I'm thinking about the robotics in a very broad way, and
Yeah.
I know a lot of us are. I mean, everything from my heavens, my car is
Yep.
now more autonomous than
Yep.
ever before, and it takes a shape that I as a human can't do. It moves faster than I can. It
Mhm.
accomplishes things I can't. It's got me thinking about how will robotics actually enhance us as
Mhm.
opposed to replicate us.
That's where I stand too. It's not about replacement. It's about this augmentation. It's this enhancement sort of story. And what you're getting into with the idea of your cars becoming more autonomous and more robotic like in itself is something that I did like at CS 2025 that we saw coined as this term physical AI. It's really robotics are an expression of artificial intelligence now more than ever, where you could have in the past, having worked in this space, I used to work in medical robotics with a client. They it was very much input A, output B. It was robotics without AI. Now think about what that means if you're adding AI on board, say a surgical robotic that the human knee, you might do joint replacement, and theoretically it sounds like it's a rinse and repeat process with these robots. That's what they've been like for years. Every joint is different. Every person is different. And if you can get to that personalized, you're actually augmenting the human that's conducting the surgery alongside the robot, but you're also augmenting the person too in the end of the day. Like, because at the end of the day, there's a patient on the other side and they're getting something more personalized that a robot is helping to augment their livelihood on a day-to-day basis.
It's such a fascinating example you bring because when I first joined Siemens, this was one of our first proof points for the digital twin. The idea of a personalized surgical block for that knee replacement that actually made a digital twin of the individual's knee
Mhm.
and then built the block for, when the surgery would be done to actually meet that patient. And here we are, and now you're seeing that in the large. Okay, so that's the trend number one,
Yeah.
and I want to hear what else you're seeing.
Yeah, one of the other ones, and this goes back to something that we're seeing right now in terms of the AI debate, in terms of what it's meaning for energy, is we're seeing a renaissance in terms of nuclear. And it was a very different market over a decade ago, where it was more, you saw more retirements coming into plants. But now, as we saw the other day, we had the Clinton nuclear power plant has just made, Meta is buying out that energy. And it's not just fission. What I'm talking about is we've seen breakthroughs in fusion, and we've seen an increase in the workforce by about 200% over the last 2 years in the private sector alone. We're on the verge, I think, because AI allows us to calculate more effectively what's going on in that space in terms of the energy demands, the power demands required to make fusion happen. This is a technology that, well, I'm not talking 2020s now. I'm talking late 2030s, probably earliest. But this is mega trend number two that I'm seeing is this energy renaissance that's on the verge with fusion. And what fusion unlocks is some other technologies, in particular quantum computing, which AI and an energy renaissance create a future where quantum is a lot more prevalent, it's a lot more present. And we're starting to see more quantum at our show, including this year, we're launching something called CS Foundry, which will bring AI, blockchain, and quantum computing all together and bring the innovators there because we recognize these are technologies that are really going to shape the future.
I remember going to CES years ago, seeing demonstrations of vehicle autonomy.
Yep.
And it seemed like the big question was, is the infrastructure going to be smart, or is the vehicle going to be smart, or both, or what happens? Well, no matter what, you need edge computing.
Yep.
You need computing at the point of demand because you can't stand the latency of passing data long distances. Tell me more about what you're seeing when it comes to use of that cloud and
Yeah.
where things need to be.
Well, I think the edge is one of the biggest areas of innovation because the range of applications in terms of getting that computing power right on the edge at the chip or the device level is more critical than ever, especially if you want to unlock better robotics, better autonomous vehicles, or really any sort of wearable device in many ways, because nowadays you're starting to see where we're producing data. Humans are data farms in many ways. We're producing metrics at all times. How does those metrics get assessed into something that's personalized right at the level without having maybe a massive computer run it for you? Well, you're starting to see that in wearable devices where there's more edge capability of assessing, okay, not just my heart rate anymore, but one of the big ones is how pacing data can actually predict bipolar disorder on a watch. Now we're starting to see, well, here's where some of those edge devices can start to calculate and take what is one form of data and translate it into another one, another condition that it can diagnose.
Well, and finding correlation and causation
Mhm.
on data sets that we just couldn't even
Yeah.
begin to analyze
Mhm.
previously. That's exciting. Okay, so we've got the idea of the robotics, we've got quantum coming, blockchain you mentioned,
Yep.
we've got the importance of the cloud. These are all things we're working with and talking about now. What are the big megatrends reaching out much further
Mm-hmm.
that you believe are guiding the innovation that's going on today?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of what's guiding what's occurring is one of the big ones is it's not even technology, but there's a demographic shift that's really important to watch for, which is Gen Z. So Gen Z already is the largest generation out there. They make up over a quarter of the OECD workforce. 9 out of 10 of them, though, live in emerging markets. So they live in Southeast Asia, they live in Africa, they live in Latin America. That is a fundamental shift in terms of how technology and who is using technology, and you've already seen these sort of shifts play out in terms of what technologies rose over time. The leading digital payments country in the world in 2014 was actually Kenya. You've seen social commerce, which sounds new to us in the US, emerged out of Latin America years ago. And then, of course, my favorite is Time Magazine once dubbed the QR code one of the biggest failures of technology in 2017. Well, look how it emerged out of APAC and has become one of the most important technologies today. So what I'm saying here is you need to watch where people are innovating and how they're innovating in their own markets and what that means in terms of diffusing into the rest. And why this generational shift is important. This will be the first one where the majority of spend is outside of Western countries for the first time ever. So that is one of the biggest megatrend is what does Gen Z, and then of course Gen Alpha is already starting to emerge, but Gen Z has that buying power now. That is one of the biggest megatrends we're watching for, and that globalized approach to it as well.
It's fascinating. We're talking about several of the trends that we at Siemens
Mhm.
track as well, whether it's climate change, urbanization, the
Mhm.
aging demographic of people
Yep.
everywhere. So, I've been laser focused on what are those technologies that enable us as we grow old. You're talking about the technology that's going to respond to the demand of the newest consumers in the
Mhm.
world. But let me bring this back to people because, what you've described to us is a world actually when I hear it through your voice, there's huge opportunity ahead of us. You sound incredibly optimistic. What do you hope for the people who are living, who might today feel like they're living in a period of uncertainty? What would you love to say to an audience about a framework, a mindset that's helpful?
I am someone who's very optimistic about these technology. It doesn't mean I don't battle sometimes this idea of skepticism or concern around how technology is used. You want to see it work for everyone is one of the most important things. So working for everyone, that's the framework I start with, which is when I look at technology, what is that story behind it from the human element that really showcases, all right, it's not just a autonomous vehicle anymore. It's an autonomous ambulance that can get someone through traffic more efficiently to save their life. It's looking at the use cases at the end of the day and thinking about how can technology work for me. And I think that's one of the most important elements of maintaining an outlook of technology is really it's developed for people by people. And if you can look at and express and have a willingness to engage with technology, you get a lot more autonomy over the future outcomes of technology. And I think that's one of the most important thing is rather than taking kind of a hands-off or a combative view to technology, I think you're setting yourself up into a position of you might have it pass you by in a way, or have it not meet the demand that you're looking for. So I think by having a more optimistic and positive relationship with technology, we have this ability to be the masters of our own destiny because really we're the ones building it. Shouldn't we be forging our own destiny with it alongside?
I love to have my guests share their own optimistic outlook for the future as you look forward. And in this fabulous role that you have, tell us about the world that's out there in front of us.
Yeah, well, I like to think that what we're seeing between all the technology points that we saw today is a world where technology is more responsive to our individual demands, where it feels like I used that phrase digital coexistence very intentionally. The best technologies, and it's one of my favorite quotes, are the ones that actually disappear, the ones that you don't see all the time because they're so ubiquitous, as you put, that's a great word, that they move into your everyday. It's kind of how the smartphone has become in a lot of ways to us, but how does it move into things like AI, into ambient computing, where your room, your setting around you is just responding to your needs? That's a future that I look to. It goes back to my answer about like seeing like World's Fair and Epcot. That's the type of future that I think is actually possible based on some of the advancements that we've seen already and where we could go in the next few years.
Fantastic. Brian, love this conversation. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
A huge thanks to Brian for bringing his insights to the optimistic outlook. I hope, like me, you're excited and optimistic about what's in store as both consumer and industrial tech shape the future. And I'll conclude by saying this. When I started my career as a software programmer in the 1980s, the technology we have today would have been unimaginable. I like to joke that today's toothbrushes have more memory than the computer systems we were using back then. But you know what? Those computer systems I started my career on were exponentially more powerful than what engineers had used to put a man on the moon a decade earlier. That's how the digital world progresses. Now, rapid advances are possible in the industrial world too. But ultimately, our ambition, our sense of purpose, matters as much as the technology. So much is possible in this future that we're creating together. As always, check out our show notes to learn more and let me know your predictions for the future with your comments on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.
Please follow us on social media and on your favorite podcasting platform. Thank you for tuning in.